Today's story is downright gruesome and downright terrifying, to be honest with you. And also another video discretion. Today's names in this story are pretty hard to pronounce, so if I do butcher one or two, please forgive me. But before we begin, if true crime stories intrigues your interest, then I would highly suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as that's all I do and I upload once a week. But with all that being said, let's begin. Our main character in today's video is Henry Chau Hoi Ling. He was born on June 7th, 1983, and well, he was a second child to his parents, Glory Chau Wing Ki and Moon Suyeta. Now, when it comes to the parents' past, there's not much known about them. At least I couldn't find anything much about these parents. But the things that I found were that both of them, one of them was 65 and the other one being 63, also had another son, and the family of four would live in an apartment in Hong Kong. The apartment itself wasn't big at all, but it was definitely enough for the family to live in. Henry's childhood was something that you would call unremarkable. The main reason for that was just because Henry wasn't a motivated kid. But when he was motivated, he was known for being a very smart kid and also a very sociable one. But again, that was when he was motivated. But when he wasn't motivated, which was kind of a lot of the time, he was just one of them shy kids that really didn't speak much. But even though Henry was like this, it did frustrate his parents. But as time went on, Henry's parents just gave up on it because they just thought that that was who Henry was going to be, and there's nothing we could do to change about it. And of course, as long as he gets good grades, we won't really care about his little behaviour. And so his parents did their best of their abilities to support Henry, to the point where they would even pay for private tuition and also for piano lessons. But again, these things were something that Henry wasn't keen on doing. But growing up for Henry was pretty lonely, as again, he would keep to himself. And unfortunately, since he was like that, when he joined secondary school, he would find himself with no friends. And not just that, his hunger for school would slowly diminish, and also his grades would diminish along with it. And even though his parents were kind of expecting his grades to dip, it was just the way that his grades plummeted really shocked his parents, to the point where they decided to step in and do something about it, before unfortunately it was way too late. So both parents would make up a plan that would give their son a fresh start in life and also his education journey. And I know you're asking, what is that plan? Well, the plan was for them to send Henry to Canberra, which was in Australia, to start a new course in actuarial mathematics. Canberra is a decent sized state that was filled with life. And obviously, since it was the capital of Australia, there were many things to do, but most importantly, the schooling over there was amazing. And so a couple of weeks would go by and they would tell Henry that you're going to Canberra. And then more time would pass and both parents were waving goodbye to Henry as he was leaving. But unfortunately for them, this would make everything 100 times worse, as Henry did not fit in whatsoever. From the language barriers to Henry becoming the subject of bullying, or unfortunately his appearance, and also unfortunately he would get discriminated in school by the other kids. All this leaving a heavy mental strain on Henry, and unfortunately this harassment would not go away, and every day Henry would become more numb to this harassment. But one day in 2003, Henry would have enough and would drop out. And this was also due to the fact that his grades were at an all-time low. So when he dropped out, the school wasn't really fussed on him leaving. So on that fateful day, Henry would leave the school doors and would get the first plane back to Hong Kong. But one of the main things was he would never tell his parents about anything. From the insufferable bullying that he experienced to the fact that he dropped out of school. And so when he was on the plane back home to Hong Kong, he would figure out something to tell his parents when they seen him, and of course when they ultimately asked him about school. And so when he landed and eventually saw his parents, he would tell them that he had graduated. And now, as you can expect, both parents would find out that he was lying. And well, kind of understandably, they were very angry at him. But again, Henry did not tell them that, the insufferable bullying that he was going through. And so they were angry and disappointed at him. And unfortunately, he would get full punishment from his parents. But even though both parents were pretty disappointed in him, they wouldn't give up on him though. And the next plan was to force him to attend Hong Kong University. At first, things would go well for Henry, until to the point where he would actually just open up to his parents and tell them that he has no desire for education. And every time he would go to class, he would kind of just doze off and go into his own mental world. But one thing that kept Henry happy was gaming and the overall gaming world. It was known if you saw Henry playing games, you can see a genuine smile on his face. And that genuine smile was good, but for his parents, they wanted him to have that genuine smile in the real world. But unfortunately for them, it would be the gaming world where you would see Henry's genuine smile. One of the main reasons that he actually loved the gaming world was due to the main fact that he was actually respected there and would have some friends as well over there. But his online friends would start to get more worried for Henry, as during these late night gaming sessions, they would have more deeper and deeper conversations. And repeatedly, Henry would tell his friends that he thought that he was a psychopath. And even though his friends couldn't actually see his face as he was saying this, it was the tone that he said these words in that really convinced his friends that he actually believed he was a psychopath. And also, it didn't really help that all of his social media profile pictures had Adolf Hitler on it. At first, when his friends met, they saw his strange profile picture and they thought it was a funny joke, which, let's be honest, it's not really a funny joke at all. But that's what they thought was the main reason behind that profile picture. But again, when they got to know Henry better, that strange and dark side of Henry began to reveal itself. Now, we all know Henry's educational life was failing and falling apart, and I'm sad to say that that wasn't the only thing that was failing and falling apart. When it came to the world of dating, it was the same for Henry. The main factor being, it was the way he would treat his partner at the time. He would be blunt and have a lack of compassion and would just overall act like a stranger to them. But things would spiral for Henry, as in his last relationship, he would actually get his then girlfriend at the time pregnant. And instead of stepping up to the challenge that life had thrown at him, he would just tell his girlfriend to get rid of the baby. And of course, his girlfriend didn't want to do that at all. So he cut all ties with her and her unborn child. One of the main reasons that Henry did not want to keep a child was due to his financial situation. Money was hard to attain for him, and for the longest times he would drift in and out of various jobs, which he would always mostly fail to keep for more than a couple of weeks. Majority of the reason why he got fired was due to his performance, or in some cases he would just quit on the spot. The only somewhat consistent job that Henry would keep was his role as a pianist, and it was through this job that Henry would meet someone that is quite important in today's story, and his name was Angus. Angus was a 35-year-old Macedonian man who was known to be a gentle and pure soul. But unlike Henry, Angus was not academic at all. But unlike Henry, he would actually try hard in his academics. Angus would also have friends growing up. Well, when I mean friends, they were mainly just using him because he was a very gullible guy. But Angus didn't really care that they were kind of using him. As long as they called him a friend, that's all that mattered to him. Angus's romance life wasn't the best either. His first girlfriend that he had unfortunately would die. It was unclear how she died, but it was known that that experience really traumatized Angus. But as you know, time heals all wounds, and Angus would go on to meet another woman, and thankfully she would stay alive, and also they would go on to get married. But unfortunately, Angus would find out a couple of weeks into their marriage that his now wife was using him to get a Hong Kong citizenship. And that's not the only thing. He would also find out that she had already been married before they even met. Again, this leaving Angus in a horrible situation. But after this whole ordeal, he would decide to move to New Zealand, and it was there where he would meet another woman. And just like the first woman that he had met, he and her would fall in love with each other. Well, again, that's what he thought. It would turn out that she would leave him without saying anything, after unfortunately she had used all of his money. Now in New Zealand with not a lot of money, Angus would decide to move back to Hong Kong in 2010. And of course, with the pain and suffering that he had endured with all the women in his life, would take unfortunately a massive toll on him. And unfortunately, on several occasions, he would try to take his own life. But even though he would fail, thankfully, he would pay a heavy price. For example, he would try to swallow a large dose of mercury as an attempt to end it all. But of course, you know, he would survive this. But he would suffer from permanent changes to his mental health. And after that whole ordeal, he would never be the same again. Angus at this point would be so desperate just for a friend, or just for someone to acknowledge him. And it was at this point of his life where he would meet Henry. Unfortunately, this would be one of Angus's main downfalls. By the end of 2012, Henry would find himself in a large amount of debt. The main reason was because he had stuck himself to unemployment, and along with that, many poor investments. And it wasn't long before he found himself asking his parents for money. His parents, who were again very loving to him, would give him money. But instead of, paying off his debt, he would go out and live this lavish lifestyle. And again, despite having no income and only the money from his parents, he would still go out and go to these fancy restaurants and also buy very expensive clothing. And the worst part about all of this was Henry, this same person that was asking his parents for money, would take the mick out of hard-working people that worked hours to earn a paycheck while he was just standing there asking his parents for money. He would often be caught scoffing and abusing those people that were earning an honest living, as he thought they were lower than them, as they needed to work. His parents would notice this type of behaviour and eventually would have enough of this behaviour. They would tell themselves that even though this is our son, we can't let him live like this forever, and plus we gotta live our own lives. And so they would ask their son to get a job multiple times, but every time they would ask Henry to get a job, he would either give them a vague answer or would tell them that he was looking for one. And by the end of 2013, the tension between his parents and Henry would reach at an all-time high, as almost every day the two parties would get into an argument on specifically why Henry hasn't got a job yet. But it was a week after where there was a serious argument that would occur. During February of that same year, Henry would ask this insane request considering his situation with his parents. What was that request? Well, he would ask his parents to sell the flats that they currently own and split the money into three ways. 1/3 was to him, another third was for his brother, and the other third for his parents. And as you can guess, his parents were having none of that. And since his parents were planning to retire soon, they needed the flats and the income from the flats. But for Henry, he wouldn't reason and he wouldn't understand what they were trying to tell him. And it was suddenly both parents would snap. And as you can probably guess, another massive argument ensued. And it was at the end of this argument that Henry would be asked to move out. And at first, Henry thought that they were joking and were trying to teach him a lesson. But when he saw that they were being deadly serious, he began to scream and start breaking things in the house before leaving the house and never returning again, which was exactly his plan. He would cut all contact with all of his family members. Where he stayed during this time was unknown, but in the following weeks something would happen that would change his life forever. March 15th, 2013. It was an early morning where the police were scrambling into a family home in the suburbs of Hong Kong. The police early in the night would get a tip-off about a man that they were desperately trying to arrest. This person, again, was a man and he was in his late 20s who lived at the property. The tip-off that the police had gotten was a chilling confession over a WhatsApp group chat that described the actions of a man who had just killed 2 people. When the police arrived at this property, they would arrest one man and then soon after arrest another man. Once the men were arrested, the police began to search this property, and as soon as the police entered the front door into the property, they knew something bad had happened. There were blood stains that covered all over the floors and also covered all over the walls. They would also find a trash bag that was filled with cement and sand. Also, while searching, they would find many different weapons throughout this property. For example, there was a saw and there were several knives. But what the detective found next was much worse. The detective would walk into the kitchen and saw that the microwave was still on. And of course, he would begin to walk over to the microwave to investigate it. Once he got close enough to the microwave, he could see that there was this thick layer of yellow grease coupled with an overpowering smell of cooked meat. But as he was about to open the microwave door, someone began to shout for him from behind him. It was an officer, so he turned around and asked the officer what was wrong. Without saying a word, the officer would walk up to the detective with a trash bag in his hand. And that same officer would open up this trash bag and the detective would look inside. And what the detective saw was human limbs in the trash bag. And it would all piece together for the detective. And without a second wasted, the detective would tell one of the officers the result, and that officer would go to the 2 men that had been arrested and would say Henry and Angus, you were both arrested for the murders of Henry's parents. And it would be known that this whole plan was created by Henry. The plan would begin shortly after Henry stormed out of his parents' apartment, when his parents denied his request and ultimately kicked him out. And to Henry, his parents became into his worst enemies. Not only are they not just going to hand over 1/3 of their money that they've been working their entire life, like he deserved that money, they also had the audacity to kick him out from their apartment. And to Henry, he was having none of that. He felt like he deserved that money and he deserved to stay in their apartment. And now to Henry, both of them needed to die, because he believed that if both of them were gone from this world, everything would go back to normal. Henry knew that he couldn't pull off this stunt by himself, so after a while of manipulating, he would get his friend, Angus, into this whole plan. And again, since Angus wasn't really hard to manipulate, Henry wouldn't really get any trouble getting Angus on board with this plan. But just as a backup plan, if Angus said no, Henry was going to force Angus by telling Angus that if you don't do this plan with me, I'm going to kill your mother. But of course, he didn't need to do that, as Angus would say yes. During the days leading up to this gruesome crime, Henry would go on to make several purchases such as knives, a microwave, a cooker, and 2 new fridges. And of course, his plan was something that his parents could never expect from their own child. Around 6 days after Henry's horrible attack, his brother would begin to get more concerned about both of his parents, as they not had contacted him in over a week, which was something that they would never do. They would always keep in contact with his brother. He would ask his brother Henry if he had heard or seen them, but Henry would reassure his brother that perhaps they went on holiday to China or something. But Henry's brother, after a while, did not have any of it, and it just seemed strange to him. So he would report his parents as missing to the police. As the police began their investigation, they found no evidence of his parents actually leaving the city, which of course raised more eyebrows. And so the brothers would create a missing person campaign on social media in hopes for any information to come out. The only thing that the brothers had at the time was the last time that the parents were seen was in Langham, a place in Montauk. But no matter what the brothers did, no new information about their parents would come out. It was almost like they just had ran off. And as you know, 9 whole days later, the police would find themselves in an apartment with a black bag that contained human limbs. But that wasn't the only thing that they found. They would also go on to find 600 styrofoam lunchboxes that was also in the apartment. But again, I've probably said this a lot of times, it gets worse. Inside of these lunchboxes contained salted and cooked meat of, both parents. And I'm going to say it again, it gets worse. As the police opened the fridges that were inside the apartment, they would find both parents' heads sitting on the top shelf. Also, while searching the bedrooms, the police would find underneath Angus's mattress was a notepad, and in that notepad contained notes on how to dispose of bodies, and also a shopping list of items that they needed. The plan was to cover the bones in cement and sand, and then throw them out into the sea, and the rest of the body was there to be consumed. Both Henry and Angus would be held in custody until their trials began, which was scheduled for August of 2014, but had to restart in February 2015 after 2 jury members were forced to drop out due to the fact that I believe it was something to do with psychological stress, but I'm not sure, that's what I just read. But when it was finally time for sentencing, Henry would get a life sentence without the possibility of parole, and his accomplice, due to his mental health and other such various things that he had wrong with him, he would only get a year in jail. So that will be it for today's video of true crime stories intrigues your interest. Then I would highly suggest you subscribe to my YouTube channel, as that's all I do and I upload once a week. But with all that being said, thank you for watching, and yeah, goodbye.